If you owned a basketball team, you'd want a Dr. J on your team. If you were diagnosed with cancer, you'd want Dr. G on your team. Meet him. Coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at Agape Senior Assisted Living in Garden City, a little north of Inlet Square Mall. We're focused on advances in cancer therapy, and we're visiting with Dr. Paul Goetowski, one of the partners at Carolina Regional Cancer Center. Good morning.
Good
morning. Mind if I call you Dr. G?
Not at all. That's what everyone does.
I understand a lot of folks use that, and probably a lot of folks wouldn't have any trouble getting Goetowski out if they said it right the first time, but Dr. G.
It just takes too much, wastes too much time.
Like Dr. J,
Life's
very
too
easy
short.
to get out and enjoy. That's
There
right.
you go.
You were originally from the area, Dr.?
No, actually, I'm originally a Cornhusker. I'm from Omaha. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and had never strayed this far south of the Mason-Dixon line until about 20 years ago. And I've been in South Carolina since 1991. Had been near Augusta for almost 15 years. And in 2004, migrated a little farther east.
I love it.
So
you and family.
I and family. Actually, we came in shifts. One of my sons was finishing his senior year in high school, so my wife stayed with him in Aiken while I brought the rest of the crew with me. And eventually, after about a year, we were able to merge the families again.
That's tremendous. That's tremendous. Well, Carolina Regional Cancer Center has grown even a lot in the almost 5 years you've been here.
Yes, it has. It has. And fascinating things, and things that very few other places have had the opportunity to make use of.
Right, right. It's amazing to hear, just to think about earlier this morning as we were talking about tomotherapy, which we'll get into. But of course, a lot of folks think about many different forms of cancer and the way they're treated, and I guess treating them through either radiation therapy or chemotherapy. There are a lot of questions that people may have about that. What are the most the big distinctions there?
I think one of the first misconceptions people have of radiation, unless they've had family members who've been treated 30 years ago or something with much older, cruder types of treatment like cobalt, is that it's kind of a Star Wars space age treatment that didn't exist until the space race began. Actually, it's one of the oldest types of cancer treatment, successful cancer treatment. Radiation first began in the late 1890s, and in fact, one of the first cancer patients cured of their cancer was a patient with cervix cancer in New York. She was treated at Memorial Hospital in 1896, 98, something like that. Right. Lived for 25 years afterwards, treated with the new radium capsules. And some people even still refer to radiation as radium therapy.
Really?
It's interesting that name still hangs around. Up until probably the 1950s, before surgery really was able to be used aggressively with anesthesia and antiseptics and so forth after World War II. And chemotherapy really didn't come into its own until the 60s. With leukemia treatment and so forth. So radiation actually was one of the first successful treatments for cancer, and still is a very important component, but all three really are still crucial in most every patient.
Is that right? Yeah. So oftentimes you will work in tandem with other either facilities or other doctors that...
The team approach really is key to a good treatment in the modern era. When I first started training a few years ago, we were still at the stage where it was an argument between whether radiation or chemo or surgery was the best approach. We now realize that each offers its own tool that, if used effectively, gives the patient the best opportunity.
Yes. Dr. G, had you always wanted to be an oncologist? Had you thought about that at early stages in life? A family member or otherwise who encouraged it?
Well, my father was a surgeon, and I had always intended to follow somewhere in the footsteps. But in early years in college, realized that getting into med school was not automatic by any means. So I looked for a good backup career, and won't go into the whole story, but basically ended up in engineering. So I was actually an engineer and physicist in another life in my undergraduate career, and had 3 job offers waiting for me as an engineer while I was waiting to find out if I'd been accepted to med school. Obviously, I didn't take those jobs. But that background has been very important in my particular specialty because we work extensively with computers, with we have our own staff of physicists. All of that is very critical to know what you're doing when you're treating the patient. My father had tried to convince me to go follow a surgical path, and I just wasn't a surgeon personality. It wasn't something that I could see was the right choice for me. He didn't fully understand exactly what radiation oncology did at the time I chose, but a few years later, when I had first started practice in Omaha, he was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer. And my father ended up being my patient. The whole father-son, doctor-patient relationship was thrown into a blender.
Oh, boy.
But after one particularly difficult treatment course where we were trying to control pain from his cancer, successfully, I'm glad to say, I think probably the biggest praise I've ever had was when he said, "You know, you're a lot smarter than I gave you credit for." So from that point on, he understood better what it was and how important what I did was. So it was like many things in life. It's one of those directions that God seems to guide you to, whether you really want to listen or not.
Right. That's wonderful. It turned out that way.
And I've been at it now for almost 25 years.
Son of a gun. About the same length of time, albeit you not here that whole time, the Carolina Regional Cancer Center has been around. I think I saw it was almost 28 years.
Actually, we've had our, I think, 27th anniversary.
Good.
First started as a satellite for the medical university and then became a separate entity of its own about 20 years ago.
Right. And growing leaps and bounds since then. Some of the biggest changes what are some of the biggest advances that have happened over that, let's say, 20 years, over the last 20 years since it broke off in cancer?
Back at that point in time, radiation was still largely directed towards simply treating a general region. We didn't have very good ways of monitoring how accurately we were treating. You could take films, but they were fairly cumbersome, and usually 4, maybe 6 fields at most. About 15 years ago, the concept of custom blocking became commonplace, and that often required creating handmade lead blocks that fit up in the head of the machine, which was, again, cumbersome, but a step. Following that, IMRT, which uses computer-controlled blocking that's designed inside the head of the machine and can change continuously. So you can actually change the shape of the beam as the patient's being treated and as the machine is moving in different directions.
That's tremendous.
And that's really been the state of the art up until recently, and has allowed us to do many things that were very difficult to do well before that. So that, for instance, prostate cancer is an area that I've seen major changes in the 20 years that I've been actively practicing. And it used to be that because sensitive structures, the bladder, the rectum, and so forth, were nearby, your doses were limited. Because if you did too much damage to those, there were a lot of side effects. With the modern IMRT techniques, we can literally shape the radiation to fit the areas we need to treat and vastly reduce the collateral damage, so to speak, in Iraq terms, I guess, of treating other areas, structures nearby. So we've not only been able to reduce the side effects, but also increase the dose to the point where radiation essentially is equivalent with surgery for prostate cancer. There's really very little difference in the long-term control rates between the two.
just not the biggest distinction there, I guess, not in cutting up the. I mean, what would be the most recognized distinction there for a layman?
The biggest advantage, of course, is if you can avoid surgery.
Right.
Obviously, in having to take out a section of tissue in a fairly sensitive area, that it can have effects on controlling the urine afterwards and sexual function. Both of them may have some impact, but when you have to remove part of it, you have to take out part of the connection structure. Right. But trading off with that radiation often involves several weeks of treatment. So it's a matter of what's the bigger side effect or the greater downside that you're willing and interested in taking. But I think most patients have been very pleasantly surprised. They expect a lot of things to happen with radiation that don't.
What are some of the things that folks would expect the most often? I'm sure that's
probably the most common phrase I hear, particularly in this area, is going to burn them up and things like that.
Are you going to burn me up?
Going to burn me up. I haven't burned anybody in years. And I think that's one thing that patients are most surprised when they don't get the side effects they expect. Now, obviously, there's still some. And it depends entirely on the area that we're treating. Sometimes people who are not well versed in what radiation really can do assume that things that happen far distant from where we're treating, if we're treating the prostate, we're not going to be affecting the lungs, for instance. But it's interesting how many people don't really understand that.
Oh, yeah.
So that's part of what I do when I first see a patient, is to try to really educate them what they're going to expect, what will happen, what might happen, what won't happen. But if it does happen, it's something else, and we need to really pursue that.
Right. Probably a lot of folks come in thinking, if you're treating my right hand, it's going to impact my left hand as well.
Exactly.
And it's just not that way.
And it's not that way. Basically, it only affects the area that we're actually aiming at. And aiming is probably the most critical term anymore, because the accuracy that we deliver the radiation determines a great deal on how effective we are in controlling side effects and in controlling the disease. So that's taken on a whole new step with our latest equipment.
Is there a most common cancer that you're treating or that Carolina Regional Cancer Center is treating, Dr. G?
Probably unfortunately, probably the most common cancer that we treat involves the lung or the throat. Both of those are, I can say, almost universally related to smoking.
Is that right?
Not every patient. There's always somebody who'll say, well, I know so-and-so who never smoked a day in their life and they got lung cancer. And that's true, but those are rare. Probably 90% or more had been smokers, sometimes not even for the last 20 years, but that effect stays to some extent. Obviously, if you can quit, you're improving your chances from the first day you quit, but it doesn't always remove it to zero.
And radiation treatment can truly have an impact on...
Absolutely. Whenever we can find a cancer early enough that surgery might be able to remove all of it, that's the ideal situation, but all too often it's not until a patient has symptoms, and many times by the time they've had symptoms, the disease has advanced to other areas. Fortunately, radiation can treat a lot of areas that the surgeon can't reach effectively without a lot of risk or side effects. So we can treat more advanced cancers that surgery can't. And there is one area where particularly we've found that by combining often together at the same time chemotherapy and radiation so that they're working synergistically, each one adds to the effect, both beneficial and side effects, but the end result is that we can get a much better control rate, much better cure rate if we can combine our best tools together to work simultaneously.
Very interesting. I was fascinated to see that the Carolina Regional Cancer Center, a sidebar there, is the first radiation oncology facility in the state, accredited by the American College of Radiology. A little different. Just review. I mean, that's a big coup there. it sounds like.
It really is. The American College of Radiology is the national organization that essentially oversees the training and the qualifications and requirements for quality radiation, whether it be radiology for diagnostic purposes, CAT scans, x-rays and so forth, or radiation therapy or radiation oncology for treatment. And taking the step to get accredited is not required yet, which is probably why a lot of places haven't. But we realized that it was, it distinguished us, put us a step higher where we felt we really were, and gave us the recognition for that. But it took about 2 years of effort. They had to review all of our physics and dosimetry and simulation treatment machines, as well as physicians, our following a minimum level of quality assurance to make sure that we were documenting and treating patients appropriately.
If a viewer needs to get off to work now or get family out of the house, Dr. G, what's the best? Do you all have a website or a phone number for a viewer to go online to learn more about Carolina Regional Cancer Center?
Yes, absolutely. And we've worked hard on trying to get a good website that helps patients to learn more. And patients are starving for information because suddenly they've got a disease that's very serious and potentially life-threatening. But www, of course, crccmd.com.
crccmd.com. I think you mentioned a good phone number. If someone doesn't have internet access, they can call just to find out a way to get some more written information. 449-9415?
9415.
Okay,
that's right.
9415, 449-9415. They can call and ask, can I get some written information? Or surely go to their public library and go online if they don't have internet access, crccmd.com.
And the American Cancer Society is a good resource as well.
Great.
And their office is right on the corner of 48th and Grissom Parkway.
Very close to y'all's office.
That's
Speaking of that, you are located off of 48th Avenue on Oleander.
On Oleander, 4708 Oleander. So
Great location. How does, and of course we've got just a short amount of time, we want to get to tomotherapy, which highlights y'all's cutting edge nature there of CRCC, but how do you all remain up to date on treatment options there?
Well, I think between the four of us, the physicians involved, we have I think a good professional rivalry where we each try to help stay one step ahead of the other. And we have regular conferences. We discuss all new patients under treatment during weekly chart conference, tumor conference at all of the hospitals that we work with, Grand Strand, Loris, Conway. And recently Waccamaw. And we all have our own subscriptions to the national journals and feel an obligation to stay up and stay current with all of that material.
Right. Great. Great.
I feel I'm not doing a decent job unless I know what it is that's really current.
I love it. I like that internal rivalry between the four of y'all. That's great. Tomotherapy may have been prompted by some of that rivalry. This is something we can do that'll really, for all four of them, but it'll be very cutting edge.
Right. That was something where we've needed additional treatment capacity for a long time. We've had 2 operating machines. Our schedules were expanding from 6:30 in the morning till often 6 or 8 at night, just simply to be able to, we don't want to rush patients, we want to handle them properly, so you stay as late as it takes to get the job done.
Right.
But that's hard on the staff, it's hard on the patients. So when we made the decision to apply for what's called a CON, Certificate of Need, for a third machine, we could have gone with the latest conventional equipment, which would have been very capable and allowed us to essentially do what we have been doing, maybe a little bit better. But there was a new device that had just come out within the last 3 years that was FDA approved very recently, and it's called tomotherapy.
Tomotherapy.
Right. And tomo means around or circular, so treating around. And essentially it's much like CAT scan, which stands for computerized axial tomography. You're acquiring a picture by circling the X-ray tube around the patient and then rebuilding the picture. And in fact, the tomotherapy equipment is actually built in a modified CAT scan gantry. So it's continuously rotating around the patient. A little bit of Italian here, I talk with my hands. But it actually is rotating around the patient so that it's treating not from 2, 3, 4, 6 different directions, but actually 50 to more, 50 to 100 different directions that we're treating small pieces that each adds together.
That's tremendous.
And by doing that, we can actually vary where we're treating. If we're coming through the heart, we actually want to reduce the dose, but once we're to the side of the heart, we can actually come in a little bit more. So it varies depending on what's between what we want to treat and what we don't.
Well, the basics of the different cancers that can be treated by tomotherapy, what would those be? And is this one of a kind in the area? Do many other places have tomotherapy machines? There's probably a pretty big ticket item.
It is, and that was part of the decision, was that it was substantially more expensive than a conventional machine. But what it allowed us to do was so much more. A good example is a patient recently who had a melanoma on the scalp. Elderly gentleman has had 2 operations already and has recurrence in multiple locations. So the surgery would literally involve grafting new skin onto the scalp, really without any good assurance that it wouldn't still come back with that. So that radiation was an option that the surgeon had asked if I felt was a reasonable alternative. And with the tomotherapy, we can actually shape the radiation field to follow the contours of the scalp, yet avoid the brain tissue underneath.
Right.
Perfectly ideal situation. Prostate cancer is another area where the additional benefit that tomo has is that not only can we refine the treatment field, but we can actually acquire an image while we're treating, so that with each pass of the radiation beam, there's also a detection array that can generate a picture just like a CAT scan. Tremendous. So we can actually acquire a CAT scan before each treatment with the patient on the treatment table, and if we need to make minor adjustments, we can actually compare what we planned and what we're treating and make those adjustments on the fly, so the patient is treated within literally millimeters.
That is tremendous.
So that we
what
can
an impact.
An example is somebody with a spine metastasis right next to the spinal cord. They've had radiation before. Previously, we'd often have to refer that patient straight to surgery because we couldn't afford the risk of harming the spinal cord and possibly damaging it and paralyzing the patient. With the tomotherapy, we can actually define where he's been treated before, or she, and define the treatment field so that we can exclude the spinal cord very efficiently and still treat the patient well. So it's opened up whole new avenues that we never had before.
That's tremendous.
And we're one of only 3 in the state, Spartanburg and Medical University in Charleston are the other 2.
That is fantastic. Great for the Grand Strand. And so you probably have folks coming in from the PD, from Eastern North Carolina, from all over.
We just started actually using the tomotherapy unit for patients. We've gone through 2 months of testing beforehand to make sure. So we've only been treating really in the last 2 weeks. And we already have, I think, 12 new patients on it. We expect to have it running at full capacity of 25 patients by the beginning of August.
That is tremendous.
So that's been a real boon for us.
Well, I'm embarrassed to say we've run out of time. I wanted to ask just some of those aspects of what could I do to try to stave off cancer. Is there anything that any one person, can they do it, or is this hereditary? But we'll have to get you back another time.
Good topic for another show.
I love it. Thanks so much for being with us this morning, Dr. G. Have a great week.
My pleasure.
Stay tuned to a little more Carolina People with Dr. Paul Goetowski coming up next. One of only 3 in the state. one of only 213, not only nationwide, but worldwide, 213 worldwide. How did this tomotherapy machine end up in Myrtle Beach and serving this area? Clearly, the Carolina Regional Cancer Centers made a difference not only to their patients in being cutting edge, but making a difference in the entire community around in this area. There are going to be folks that are traveling in from all over. You heard Dr. G talking about one down in Charleston, one in Spartanburg, and now one right here on the Grand Strand. Carolina Regional Cancer Center, crccmd.com, crccmd.com, or give them a call, 843-449-9415. Take the time to learn more about this amazing organization and tomotherapy machine, cutting edge every day. Thanks so much for being with us, Dr. G.
My pleasure, Greg. Thank you.
Very definitely.